Hey YouTube, Kevin Cleary here with a knife review for you. Today we are taking a look at the very attractive, very interesting WE 705. Now this is coming from Zelric42's channel. Zell is the North American rep for WE knives, and so he'll send a list off every once in a while and say, hey, here's some knives available for review. And this was on the list and I really liked the look of this guy, so I requested it. And I've got to say, from a design standpoint, this is definitely a win, especially for WE knives who sometimes go a little over the top. You know, this is very simple. It's very straightforward. The lines match really nicely. I mean, from a design standpoint, this is really, really well done. Very, very attractive. So, moving on from that aspect, there are a couple of issues that I have with this knife, and we'll get to those as we work our way along, but it is very attractive. Now, one of the issues, of course, is going to be that because of the placement of the pocket clip, it's not going to sit nicely for us to be on camera. So, it's going to be constantly rolling on its back, which is kind of annoying. I'll try to make sure I roll this over so you get a good look. This is an accurate look at the knife. If you're looking at it and that's all you see, it kind of can throw you off, okay? So, let's start off the way we always do with size and weight, which I've got to say, guys, is a real win for this knife. This knife is 8 7/16 overall, so just under 8.5 inches, which is really a sweet spot for an EDC blade. Yet generally that gives you enough handle that it's going to be comfortable. It's going to have 4-finger grip. It also gives you enough blade that you're going to get most cutting tasks done no problem, and that's kind of the case here. The handle length is 4 3/4 inches, so yeah, lots of real estate there. The blade length is 3 5/8, so that's measured from here to the tip, which, by the way, is how most, everywhere that I've been able to look, that's how law enforcement's going to measure, so that's kind of the one that matters most. Let's flip it over so you can take a look at the other side while I'm chatting here. 4.2 ounces is the weight here, guys. 4.2 ounces. That's exceptional for an 8 and almost 8.5 inch titanium frame lock. Got to give WE a lot of credit for getting the weight down, and they do that by heavily milling out internally. You can see that milling in there, and you can see it on that side as well. I've got to, I really, really appreciate that WE does that, because it allows me to carry a titanium frame lock without feeling like I've got a brick in my pocket. So they definitely do a great job with keeping the weight down on this knife and a lot of their models. All right. So now that we've talked about, and so this carries really, really well. By the way, I don't think I've shown it to you closed yet, so before we move on, let me close it down. So you can see it's pretty slim, does not take up a lot of real estate in the pocket, and so for that reason and the weight, this carries really, really nicely. So if you want a good knife to have in your pocket all the time, this definitely works from that perspective. Now, let's move on to the blade. Lots of good things about the blade. I love the shape overall. The design looks really cool. It's M390 steel. Again, very, very well done. Now, there's a couple things that I take an issue with. The first one is definitely what they call a hand-rubbed satin finish. Now, you guys look at that closely and tell me if you think that looks like a hand-rubbed satin finish. It definitely looks bead blasted to me, and I've had, let's see, I've had about 4, maybe 5 WE knives that claim to have this hand-rubbed satin finish. And I mean, I'm sure someone has rubbed this by hand, okay, but they have not taken it to where it ought to be a really nice hand-rubbed finish. If you've ever had a custom knife with a hand-rubbed finish, if you've ever had a Riot with a hand-rubbed finish, or just about any other knife with a hand-rubbed satin, this is not what it looks like. This looks very bead blasted, and in watching reviews of a lot of WE knives that have this finish, the reviewer has called it a bead blast finish because it looks bead blasted. All right, so that's my one issue with the blade. Issue number 2 with the blade is very little cutting edge. It would have been nice to see this designed just a little bit differently. The finger choil is very large, and it ends up leaving you with only 3 1/8 inches of cutting edge. So 3 1/8 inches of cutting edge on a 3 5/8 inch blade on an 8.5 inch knife overall is less than what I would consider ideal. And then finally, the worst thing about this blade is the angle of this primary bevel. It is so open. So what I mean by that is, here would be a very thin angle, and the more it opens up, right, the less effective as a cutting tool it's going to be. Well, This knife, look how short this distance is here, and you've got pretty thick blade stock. And so this is just way too wedge shaped to cut really well. And you know, I tried to cut a few different things with this knife, and sure enough, it just, you know, it breaks apples in half. It doesn't slice through anytime you're trying to move this knife through material, it just doesn't work that well. And that is a frustration for me because I want this knife to be good. I love the design. I love the size and shape. I love everything about it. Now, here's what they could have done if they would have forgotten about this fuller and ground this all the way to the top. I think it would have thinned the blade out enough that it would be an effective cutting tool. But as it is less than ideal. Will it cut stuff? Yeah, because it is very thin behind the edge, okay? It really is. You know, if you measure this with a caliper, it's nice and thin, like 15 thousandths, so really good. But it so quickly gets thick that it doesn't perform very well. By the way, I did have a comment the other day. I talked about when you see a thin secondary bevel like this, that usually means it's pretty thin behind the edge, and it means that on this knife, and it's gonna mean that about 99% of the time, okay? Because most knives are sharpened at about 20 degrees. It's true though, the commenter made the point that if that secondary bevel is super wide like this, well, yeah, then it's not going to be, then you can get a very small secondary bevel and still have a knife that's fairly thick behind the edge, right? So, well, that's true. It's pretty rare. Most knives are going to be sharpened around 20 degrees unless it's a Ratmandu or a Bussy or some other like hard use outdoor knife. Charade, by the way, often gets their edge angles really wonky. But this knife is sharpened at around 20 degrees per side, and so that thin little bit of secondary bevel tells you that this is thin behind the edge, and it is. So they got that right, but the problem is the blade itself, there's just not enough space here. Okay, it needs to have more angle. Finally, the fuller here, and I think the fuller is really nice. I can catch it really well to spider flick the knife open or even thumb open the knife. So it's really functional from that aspect. The one thing I will say is look at the texturing inside. So I've often commented that, you know, fuller is not a big deal. They're usually pretty easy to clean out, but they have gone out of their way to make this less easy to clean out, and that kind of sucks. Okay, so it's frustrating, this knife, because of course the key part of any knife is the blade, and they really kind of missed on this blade. And the sad thing is everything else about this knife, as we go on with the rest of the review, everything else is going to be pretty darn good. And so let's go on with the action. This is going to be typical WE action, ceramic bearing, ceramic detent, flips pretty well. Now it doesn't flip hard because of two things. The detent is a little softer than most WE knives. It's sort of a throwback to when I used to complain about this all the time. Generally speaking, they've fixed the detent, but this one is a little rough. The other thing that's odd is the location of this flipper, okay? The way this flipper is located, notice here's the pivot and here's the flipper. If this were up 1/8 of an inch, you would get so much more leverage on this blade that it would flip a lot harder even with the soft detent, but they've got it quite a bit down. And frankly, if they had moved this flipper down and moved this finger toil accordingly, you would actually get also quite a bit more cutting edge. So action is good, but it's not great. And the reason it's not great is the detent's a little soft and the flipper is not ideally placed. The geometry is not perfect. So moving on now to the handle. And guess what? Oh, by the way, I should say this, that the action, like many WE knives, is very comfortable. So, you know, there's nothing sharp, there's nothing painful, there's nothing that, you know, makes your hand fatigue as you're flipping this knife. Everything is easy to access, everything is easy to actuate. So they ought to get some credit for that as well. Now let's move on to the handle. This is a nicely milled titanium handle. You've got really nice texturing. I love this little groove cut in, the 3 holes so you can see the blade when the knife is closed. I really like that touch. Yes, we do have the typical star hardware from WE. I don't really mind that at all. I will say the pocket clip is great on this knife. This goes in and out of pocket so easily and so comfortably. And it doesn't look like it has a ton of space, but when you actually put it into practice, when you throw this into a pair of pants, I'm wearing 511 pants today, and it goes in and out of the pocket really, really well. So in terms of the design of this handle, in terms of the quality of the milling and the fit and finish and the texturing, all of it is great. The backspacer is a full backspacer, which I don't normally love, but in this case, it doesn't add a lot of weight, so there's no complaint there. The lanyard loop is really, really nicely incorporated so that, look, it doesn't affect the overall design of the knife in any way. It's just very discreet. And again, that I think is a total win. So this is why it frustrates me a little, because the ergonomics of this knife, okay, in hand, it feels just great. It's grippy, it's positive, it's comfortable. You know, you have that option to choke up a little bit with the finger choil, which I do like, even though I think this one is not entirely perfectly implemented. But the ergos are great, the design is great, the comfort is great, the quality is great. And so many good things, except for the one thing you really need to be great, which is, of course, the blade. So let's go ahead with some comparisons. I've got a couple of WE knives here. I've got some other Chinese-made knives. I've got a bunch of different things. So let's start off with a Para 2, just because everyone is familiar with the Para 2. And if I didn't show it, people would be asking. So there you go. There it is beside a Para 2. You can see, if it's possible, this knife has about the same cutting edge as a Para 2, and it's larger. And so everyone already complains about the lack of cutting edge on a Para 2. That's about the only thing that people complain about. And this knife is in the same boat, only it's actually a bigger knife. Let's see, here is my Riat Knives Torrent, a wonderful, wonderful Chinese-made knife, one of my favorite overseas knives, in fact, my favorite overseas knife. In terms of quality, yeah, this is a bit of a step up, not a huge drastic step up. The blade finish is much, much nicer as far as I'm concerned. And of course, this is a blade that will actually cut things the way you want it to, rather than this guy. Now, you will be paying a little more for this knife. You can probably find one on the secondary market for around 300 bucks. What else have we got? Here is the ZT0920. This is also a visiting knife. You can see it's quite a bit bigger, but you're getting very nicely milled titanium. And here's the thing, guys. If you're looking at a WE knife, if you're looking at a Riat knife, if you're looking at a Kaiser knife, what's the one that recently came out? There are a couple of other Chinese makers that are doing a pretty good job, but man, you know, ZTs are still extremely compelling. They cost less than a lot of these Chinese competitors, and the designs are every bit as good, and often you're getting, you know, action and features and things like that that are every bit as good. So the more the more titanium frame locks I look at, the more I'm impressed by Zero Tolerance, especially, by the way, the 0920. I think this is ZT's best knife of the year. And in fact, I think it's probably going to make my list of the top 10 knives of the year, or top 5, depending on how that whole list works out. I'm working on it now. What else have we got? Oh yeah, look, here is the WE 604. This is one of my favorite WE designs. It is so cool. Now, the blade is not the most ideal blade that's ever been made. It's good, it's functional, and I do cut stuff with it and it works fine. But the design, this is such a beautiful knife, guys. I just can't get over it. So let's get that one out of the way. Here's another WE knife, probably, you know, similar in flavor, I guess. And I guess all of these, so if I move this one up, let's bring this one back in as well. All these are kind of similar in flavor. They're long, slim knives. And I don't always love that, but these are all pretty well implemented. Here's another one that doesn't want to lay right for the camera. This is, of course, the WE 618. And I think you can pick these up a little cheaper than these. And this is only like 3 ounces or something. Really, really lightweight. Let's throw in one more knife here. This is what you might have to start looking at. If you want something that has similar, you know, colors and options as a WE knife, Olamic is doing a great job with offering that kind of stuff. This one, of course, was my specific request, and they did a great job with it. But yeah, WE knives is about, the big thing that WE has going for them is you know, they often have lots of colors available, lots of options, the hardware colors, the handle colors, even the blade finishes. Now, I don't think there's any other blade finishes for this particular one, but getting that kind of versatility or those kind of options from North America gets really expensive really quickly. So there you go. What do I think of this knife overall? It's a near miss, okay? That's what I'm gonna call it. Great design, like look at this knife. It's so attractive. It's simple, it's elegant, it's slim, it's lightweight. There are so many things going for this knife. And if you only ever do sort of light EDC tasks, maybe opening packages, cutting a little bit of cardboard now and then, this knife would probably function just fine with the blade the way it is, but it's really disappointing that this blade was not better, okay? The issues with the blade kind of just stack on top of each other, and that's where the knife really falls down. But and the reason that's so frustrating is because this knife does so many other things right, and it really, guys, it really does. Now, so I would probably steer most people away from this knife. If you know that the issues that I've brought up about the blade are not going to be an issue for you, you don't do the kind of cutting tasks that need a blade that slices that well, then hey, go ahead and pick one up, because I think they are really, really cool, and they're certainly very well made, very easy to carry. So there you go. That's my take on the WE 705. It is so close to good, and I wanted to be able to sing its praises, but it just isn't quite there. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll talk to you soon.